Hello, everyone. I am your host, and together we are discerning truth. In this video, we're going to be looking at the political compass test, and I'm going to be giving my thoughts on the validity of the test, as well as you're going to be seeing my opinions on a lot of political issues. So, the reason I wanted to make this was because this test has become very popular in the last few years, and I wanted to test for myself and give my own opinions on the nature of the questions and also how valid the result is that you're going to be getting. The other reason I wanted to make this is because, again, we're going to be talking about more politically charged issues on this channel throughout this series. This will be the first video in that series. And so it would be a good idea for you to have an understanding of where I'm coming from before you view my videos. So, if you don't know what the political compass is, basically it's an adaptation of the traditional left right spectrum line. So, if you've ever heard of right wing politics, people that believe in that usually are people who appreciate free market values and are usually more tied to tradition. While left wing people are people who kind of throw tradition aside in an effort to make progress in society, as well as they advocate for more fair trade market values or more socialist values, even that. So, this is the traditional way of looking at it, but the political compass expands on it and it creates these two lines to create this kind of compass looking thing, like as if it was a north, south, east, west. So, we have the authoritarian and libertarian line, which is more of the social scale. So the further you go up the authoritarian line, the more that you most likely respect tradition, authority, more traditional views on the Bible, if we're going to bring a Christian perspective into it. Whereas if you go down here, you're going to have less respect for authority, more respect for progress, not tradition, and probably have a more contemporary view on biblical theology, if we're again going to be applying the Christian understanding to it. Now, on the economic scale here, we have left and right. On the left side of the economic scale, you usually advocate for more government control in the economy, or you'll advocate for more of a socialist ideology. And on the right side, it's more free market, less control of the government in the economy. So I'm going to be taking this test, and if we go even further down, we'll actually see some prominent figures in society. They have Hitler over here, called this up here fascism, anarchism, communism, neolibertarianism. Hitler is kind of put very high on the authoritarian part of the spectrum, which makes sense, and he's slightly right wing, which I can see why this is done. It's kind of debatable where Hitler is on the left right political spectrum. But I understand why they put him a little bit to the right. Some people would put him more to the left, but he was a national socialist, but he advocated for a lot of free market things. A lot of times he would give quotas, but he would have private enterprise accomplish the quotas. So it's debatable. And then we have Margaret Thatcher. She's a little too close to Hitler, I think. But yeah, I understand why she's around here. She was more of a social conservative and also more of a right wing figure. We have Milton Friedman down here, who, of course, was very, very right in his thinking of economics, but not very authoritarian. He focused more on right wing economics. We have Gandhi down here. I mean, that's pretty self-explanatory. He was very libertarian. He was very he wasn't he was more of a social thinker, more of a collectivist. So I understand why they put him here. Stalin is very authoritarian. You have to have a lot of patriotism to be in the Soviet Union and to give everything to the state, your life to the state, but also again all your profit goes to the state as well. He was very controlling in the economy because it was communism. So another good understanding of this is if we look at this style of the political spectrum. It kind of gives ideologies to where people are on the political spectrum. We have nationalism, authoritarianism, libertarianism, activism. This would be anarchism down here. You can pause the video and look at this. I'm not going to explain all these ideologies, but if I were to guess, I'm going to be on this political spectrum somewhere in here. This would probably make the most sense for me, and that would probably translate to somewhere in here on this political spectrum. But I realize that they're two different political spectrums, so we'll see exactly what happens. We'll see how accurate it is. So without further ado, let's take the test, and yeah, we'll see where I stand on a lot of different political issues. So this first page, looks like it's just a few propositions to start with concerning no less how you feel about the country and the world. So this is probably like how you feel domestically and in terms of foreign policy. Let's see what it says. If economic globalization is inevitable, it should primarily serve humanity rather than the interests of transnational corporations. Well, I think that's kind of weird to put those two on odds, because oftentimes the interests of transnational corporations further the interests of humanity. So I'm gonna disagree with that. Not strongly disagree, but I think that it's not good that this question kind of put humanity and the interests of transnational corporations on odds, because oftentimes they overlap. Okay, let's move on. I'd always support my country whether it was right or wrong. I'm going to strongly disagree with that, assuming that right or wrong meaning morally. If my country is advocating something that is antithetical to Christianity, of course I'm going to not agree with that. I'm going to be an advocate against that. No one chooses his or her country of birth, so it is foolish to be proud of it. I'm going to disagree with that. I think we should have some level of patriotism in society, but I think that it's also our allegiance should be primarily towards God and not to our country. But I think it's okay to be proud of what your country has accomplished. So I'll disagree with that. Our race has many superior qualities compared with other races. I strongly disagree. I don't think that I'm not a white supremacist. I think white supremacy is evil. And I also think that racism itself isn't founded very, very well on actual biological evidence. I think that there are some, I think it's dumb to ignore certain racial qualities. I think that it's true that certain races have different qualities, but I would never say that different races have superior qualities. But I think it would be dumb to just try and ignore the fact that there are differences between races. They're visible, they're obvious. So, but I'm going to strongly disagree with that nonetheless. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. I think this is talking about the whole concept that politics makes strange bed friends, meaning that sometimes you'll see some very odd things in where, you know, as an example, Hitler and Stalin at one time had a pact. That was a very interesting, weird kind of thing that happened. And I would, and I'm kind of neutral on this one. I'm going to agree, because I'd say that maybe I'm slightly more going to agree with this statement, that I think that we should be diplomatic in the international, on the international floor, but usually not. So I'll agree, but if there was a neutral option, I'd probably have picked that. Military action that defies international law is sometimes justified. Okay. I'm going to definitely agree with that. I'm not going to strongly agree with it, because oftentimes we need to sadly perform military action that is defying international law, especially when international law is a bunch of people sitting around the UN basically making up a bunch of stuff that they're trying to impose on other countries, but have no coercive power in doing so. So international law to me is a joke, really. There is now a worrying fusion of information and entertainment. I strongly agree with that. I think that we've come to a place where the media nowadays just reports whatever it wants, and they try to report whatever's entertaining and whatever that might be, even if it's not necessarily true. So I think that's sad. And also, I think people have become so desensitized to evil in our current day that we actually get entertained by the news and entertained by, a documentary series. Even myself, I watch documentary series for entertainment, even when it shows some very disturbing stuff. And I find it just, wow, I can't believe that happened. But I think that it's kind of odd and strange. I think it's part of the moral decay of our society that we have become entertained by such savage actions. So I'm going to actually say I strongly agree with that. Okay, the next page. Now the economy, we're talking about attitudes here, not the FTSE index. Okay. People are ultimately divided more by class than by nationality. I'm going to disagree with that. I think that people are oftentimes way more divided by nationality. If you live in Mexico or you live in Europe, you're going to have different culture, different language, different values, different attitudes. Whereas if we're in the same country, but one might be poor, one might be rich, at least you have social structures and a common social theme that unites you. So I think that people are ultimately more divided by nationality. I think that your nation determines a lot of your values and will actually determine a lot of things that happen regarding your class. So I disagree with that. Controlling inflation is more important than controlling unemployment. I'm going to agree with that statement. I think that it's a lot easier for a country to control inflation than it is to control unemployment. And so I'm going to agree on that basis. Both are important. I mean, a low unemployment rate, I believe, is the key to a successful society in terms of economics. But it's much easier for a country to control inflation. And by controlling inflation, oftentimes you can help control unemployment. Because corporations cannot be trusted to voluntarily protect the environment, they require regulation. I'm actually going to strongly disagree with this statement. And the reason I'm going to strongly disagree is because I think that in our current society now, companies have been more pressured by society to care for the environment, and it's actually become a corporate advantage to care for the environment. This is why so many corporations have environmental plans now to reduce energy or whatever, because society itself has demanded, consumers have demanded that corporations should be caring about the environment. And so now it's more of an advantage for a company to do so. And I don't think that I think that if you put regulations on a company, it's actually only going to hinder their ability to meet consumer demands because they're only going to follow now what the government is telling them rather than maybe going above and beyond because of the hidden hand of the economy where consumers are demanding more government regulations. And there's many examples of that. So, from each according to his ability to each according to his need is a fundamentally good idea. I strongly disagree. I've talked about this in a previous video. I think that this concept absolutely destroys human initiative. So, yeah, I strongly disagree with that, and I have no problem with that. The freer the market, the freer the people. Of course. Of course, the freer the market, the freer the people. That's not even a question of whether a free market is good. Of course you're more free. The less free you make the market, the more enslaved you're going to become to society as a whole. The more free you are in the market to spend your money where you want to spend it, of course, the more free you are as a person. I think that the argument that the more we regulate the economy, the more that people are going to be able to earn more money from corporations is ridiculous because corporations aren't going to thrive in that environment and therefore won't be able to give out promotions or give out raises as often. So I think, yeah, of course, the freer the market, the freer the people. It is a sad reflection on our society that something as basic as drinking water is now a bottled, branded consumer product. I strongly disagree with that. Just because a company decides to bottle water That doesn't prevent you from going to your kitchen tap and getting water that way. All it does is benefit society because now we have a preference system where I can prefer to go get bottled water from the store instead of drinking it from my tap. That doesn't that yeah, that's ridiculous. Land shouldn't be a commodity to be bought and sold. I strongly disagree. Land should be a commodity to be bought and sold. I think that we should have private property. It is regrettable that many personal fortunes are made by people who simply manipulate money and contribute nothing to their society. What is this talking about? Manipulate money. Are you talking about investing in the stock market? Because that's not manipulating money. Are you talking about investing your money in RRSPs? Like, what is this talking about by manipulating money? I'd like to actually see an example of what it's talking about. So I'm going to actually strongly disagree with this because I don't know what it means. Because in investing in the stock market, you're contributing by investing in a company. You're not just not contributing to society. I don't know. Or is it talking about inheritance? I don't know. Don't know what it means by manipulate money. Protectionism is sometimes necessary in trade. I'm kind of neutral on this. I think in some instances, but in most instances, no. I mean, it says sometimes necessary in trade. I'm going to disagree just a little bit, but if there was a neutral option, I'd probably pick it because I think there are very few instances where that can be true. The only social responsibility of a company should be to deliver a profit to its shareholders. I'm going to disagree. I think that is a very, I believe in this. I believe that the primary social responsibility of a company is to deliver a profit to its shareholders. But I think companies should be ethical. I think that that's a good Christian value to have companies ethical. And that is one regulation that I'm okay with, regulating a company by imposing good values into the company. So I'm going to disagree with that, but not strongly. The rich are too highly taxed. I strongly agree. I've talked about this before in another video. Those with the ability to pay should have access to higher standards of medical care. Standards. So I believe in a hybrid system when it comes to healthcare. And so I believe that we should have a private and a public sector where people aren't forgotten in the healthcare system, but also people are given an ability to not be put on a really long wait list. Because I live in Canada, we have universal healthcare. And in our universal healthcare system, there's often long wait lists. And so I believe that if you integrate a private healthcare system alongside the public healthcare system, you allow people that can afford higher standards of medical care, not that higher standard being not being put on a long wait list. You allow them to be given that treatment. And you also then free up the wait list in the public healthcare system. So it gives two avenues to people. It gives them that option. So I'm going to agree, but only because I believe in a hybrid system, not a full free market system. So governments should penalize businesses that mislead the public. Of course they should. Of course they should. I think that false advertising is a terrible thing that companies can do. I believe it promotes lying, which is unbiblical, and governments should be penalizing businesses that mislead the public. A genuine free market requires restrictions on the ability of predator multinationals to create monopolies. I'm going to disagree with that because oftentimes when the government gets involved, that's what actually creates a monopoly. And it's extremely hard to find a situation where a natural monopoly has come about. It's usually a result of government regulations. So I think that's kind of dumb. Okay, now look at some of your personal social values. Okay, here's where a lot more hardline Christian things will probably come in. Abortion, when the woman's life is not threatened, should always be illegal. Of course it should. We should not be killing babies as Christians. And it is a baby. It is a baby in that person's womb. Scientists agree that life starts when sperm meets egg. Okay, Don't kid yourself. It's not a bundle of cells. It's a baby. All right? And the Bible makes it clear. God hates those who shed the blood of the innocent. Okay, all authority should be questioned. I'm going to agree a little bit. I'm going to agree because I think that we should be okay with questioning authority, but I think some authority doesn't need to be questioned. There's a lot of natural authority that doesn't absolutely need to be questioned. So I'm not going to strongly agree, but we shouldn't be afraid to question authority. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Jesus says in the Bible, you've heard an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But essentially, in the new covenant, the eye for an eye and the tooth for a tooth is taken out because Jesus makes it clear that we need to pray for our enemies. We need to do good for those who persecute us. But also, in terms of a justice system, we should have some form of retribution that's given. It's not literally an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, but we should have some form of paying someone back for what they have done. So I'm going to disagree, but not strongly. Taxpayers should not be expected to prop up any theaters or museums that cannot survive on a commercial basis. I strongly agree. I don't think that that's taxpayer money spent wisely. Schools should not make classroom attendance compulsory. I'm going to disagree, but the reason I'm going to disagree is because I'm not too sure what this is asking. Because is this exempting homeschooling? It's not making that clear. I think that parents should be allowed to homeschool their children. I think that that is a good thing that society needs to allow for. But I believe also that all children should have access to education. So I'm going to disagree because I think that children should be in school and that attendance should be compulsory, but that should not exempt them from being able to be homeschooled. So I'm not going to strongly disagree with that. All people have their rights, but it is better for all of us that different sorts of people should keep to their own kind. I'm going to disagree with this. I think that as Christians, we should be talking to all sorts of different kinds of people and engaging with all sorts of different kinds of people. But I think that there are barriers when people come from different traditions, different cultures. So I'm going to disagree, but not strongly. Good parents sometimes have to spank their children. I strongly agree with that. I don't think that spanking is the only form of discipline that you should use, but I think the Bible makes it clear when it says, spare the rod, spoil the child. There is a place for spanking, but it shouldn't be your primary form of discipline, but it has its place. It's natural for children to keep some secrets from their parents. I'm going to disagree. I think that there are some things that children keep secret from their parents, but they should be very small. I think parents should have a very open relationship with their kids and say, tell me what's going on. I think it's dangerous when kids keep too many secrets from their parents because then you don't know what's going on. And a lot of bad things can come from that. Kids can be exploited on the internet, things of that sort. So I think it's important for children to be open with their parents. And in order for that to happen, parents need to be open with their children. Possessing marijuana for personal use should not be a criminal offense. I strongly disagree. I think marijuana has its place in medicine, but I think that it's often abused. The other thing is, I think that recreational use of marijuana damages your judgment and your ability, especially your spiritual judgment. And I believe that using marijuana can invite a demonic presence into you. The prime function of schooling should be to equip the future generation to find jobs. I agree with that. I think that the primary function of schooling should be to equip the future generation to find jobs. But I also think that we need to be instilling values in children. But that should primarily be happening at home Parents should be the ones instilling values in children, not necessarily just the schools, because the school's values could be, and we've seen this more and more, radically different than what the parents' values are. People with serious inheritable diseases should not be allowed to reproduce. I strongly disagree with that. I don't believe in eugenics whatsoever. I think that's very anti-biblical. The most important thing for children to learn is to accept discipline. I'm going to agree with that. I don't think it's the most important thing, but I think it's up there. I think it's one of the most important things. So I'll agree. But there's a far more values, Christian values, that need to be taught in children. There are no savage and civilized peoples. There are only different cultures. Okay, I'm going to disagree with that. And the reason I'm going to disagree with that is because what about Nazi culture? You're saying that Nazi culture is just is a culture that we just can't judge? We just can't judge Nazi culture? Yeah, it's not savage, it's not uncivilized. The fact that they put a bunch of Jewish people in gas chambers and put them in ovens, you think that that is something that we're just going to just not be able to criticize? I think that that's ridiculous. I think there are savage and uncivilized peoples. I think that we can see that in cannibalistic cultures. Are we not allowed to criticize cannibalistic cultures? So I think that there's something good about being able to actually criticize different cultures, but we have to also be understanding of certain aspects of different cultures. Some things about cultures that might seem savage to us aren't actually, but I disagree with that. If we're unable to criticize culture because we're too scared to offend somebody, then we can allow for all sorts of evil. Those who are able to work and refuse the opportunity should not expect society's support. I strongly agree with that. I think that it's very greedy and selfish to lean on society when you don't have to. That's very selfish, and it abuses the system. It absolutely abuses the system. When you are troubled, it's better to think about it, better to not think about it, but to keep busy with more cheerful things. I'm going to agree, because I don't think we should be dwelling on things, but I also think that we should be able to express ourselves, express our emotions, and not bottle things up inside. First generation immigrants can never be fully integrated within their new country. I can never be fully integrated. I'm going to disagree with that. I think that most aspects can be assimilated into a unifying principle. I think that there are some aspects which can't be, and that contributes to differences in culture even within a nation. But I think most things can be integrated. What's good for the most successful corporations is always ultimately good for all of us. I'm going to agree most of the time. I believe in Reaganomics. I believe in the trickle-down effect. So no broadcasting institution, however independent its content, should receive public funding. I strongly agree with this. I think that public funding for a broadcasting institution has contributed to fake news. I think it's contributed to a lot of lobbying. I don't appreciate that. And how you see wider society. Our civil liberties are being excessively curbed in the name of counterterrorism. I agree. I don't strongly agree. I believe that counterterrorism has been used as an excuse to especially jeopardize our privacy. And that's a big concern to me, but we need to have some sort of surveillance in society. A significant advantage of a one-party state is that it avoids all the arguments that delay progress in a democratic political system. That's kind of dumb. Of course it does. Of course a one-party state avoids the arguments that delay progress. But I don't believe in a one-party state. I believe in democracy, so I'm going to disagree with that. Although the electronic age makes official surveillance easier, only wrongdoers need to be worried. I disagree. I think that we should all be actually concerned that the government can now spy on us the way that it does. So we should be a little bit concerned about that, but not We also need some form of it. The death penalty should be an option for the most serious crimes. I strongly disagree. I think Jesus makes that clear when he says, "He without sin cast the first stone." I think that none of us should be able to enact the death penalty. I believe that we should be able to defend ourselves. I think police should have guns and guns used to kill people. But I think the death penalty itself is savage. I believe even the secular argument for the death penalty is bad because the death penalty actually costs the taxpayer more money than it does save the taxpayer money. And it uses all the person's appeals, and it takes decades for the person to actually usually be put to death. So I strongly disagree with the death penalty. In a civilized society, one must always have people above to be obeyed and people below commanded, of course. I think that without some form of hierarchy, you will fall apart as a society. You need to have some sort of command. Abstract art that doesn't represent anything shouldn't be considered art at all. Yes, I strongly agree. Come to my city. My city is full of very terrible art, and I hate it. In criminal justice, punishment should be more important than rehabilitation. I disagree. I think punishment has its place, but rehabilitation is way more important than punishment. But those are only two aspects of the criminal justice system. There's also containing an inmate so they can't reoffend, which wasn't really talked about in this question. But yeah, I think that punishment has its place, but rehabilitation should be the primary goal. It is a waste to try and rehabilitate some criminals. I believe Jesus can change anyone's heart. And so part of me wants to disagree with this, but also I'm not sure we should put all of that on the criminal justice system. So I'm going to disagree, but I'm very neutral on that. The business person and the manufacturer are more important than the writer and the artist. I'm going to disagree with that. I think that both have their place in society, and without the writer and the artist, society would have a lot of problems actually. If it was just business people and manufacturers, our society would be completely just industrial, and it wouldn't have any art, and it wouldn't have any true values being put in place. So I don't agree with that. Mothers may have careers, but their first duty is to be homemakers. I strongly agree, but I think that our duties as parents should always be to our home first. We should always be willing to sacrifice our career for our family. So I'm going to strongly agree, but even if it said fathers may have careers, but their first duty is to be a homemaker, that's true. I do believe in gender roles. I do believe that a mother's primary duty is to nurture for children, and a father's primary duty is to be the breadwinner. I believe in that. I don't think that that's always necessarily the case. My mother was a single mother who had to work, and so I can attest to that being very hard on children when your mother isn't around enough. But also, extenuating circumstances sometimes mean that the mother just has to sacrifice that, and that's honestly tragic when that happens. So multinational companies are unethically exploiting the plant genetic resources of developing countries. I'm going to disagree with that. I'll talk about that in another video probably. Making peace with the establishment is an important aspect of maturity. I agree, but sometimes the establishment is wrong, and sometimes it takes young people to stand up against the establishment. And what I mean by that is sometimes the government is issuing horrible things. Like if it was Nazi Germany here and there was all these, if the government and the Gestapo was running the place, I think that it would take the masses to rise up against the government in order to show that the government is wrong. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we shouldn't try to make peace with the establishment. I think that sometimes young people take it too far, where the establishment is based on tradition and it's based on a long time of peace and prosperity, but there's this underlying sense that as a young person, we need to sacrifice everything in the name of progression. And so I think that that is sometimes very immature. So I'm going to agree. Okay, if you got through that, okay, you'll find the propositions on religion a breeze. Okay, well let's see. Astrology accurately explains many things. I'm going to disagree, but the Bible warns about astrology for a reason, and that's because there is something demonic and there is something to astrology, but in general, it doesn't explain many things. But I think that as Christians, we are actually supposed to avoid astrology, not just because it's false, but because there is something actually demonic about astrology. You cannot be moral without being religious. This is kind of dumb because everybody has a moral code, whether you're religious or not. If you're Hitler, you have a moral code. If you're myself as a Christian, you have a moral code. If you're just an atheist, you have a moral code. And everybody has a conscience too. God gives everyone a conscience. So everyone has their own sense of morality. But I'm going to answer this, I guess, based on my morality, which states that you can only be justified by grace through faith in Jesus. So I'm actually going to strongly agree with this based on the fact that you can't be justified. I'm going to exchange this word moral for being right, being righteous with God, and religious with being Christian, because I understand what this question is kind of getting at. It's just not worded very well. Charity is better than Social Security as a means to helping the genuinely disadvantaged. Yeah, it is. I made a whole video on that. That doesn't mean that Social Security doesn't have a place in society, but charity is better than Social Security. Okay, so we have some people are naturally unlucky. I don't believe in luck, so I'm going to say strongly disagree. I don't know if this is getting at luck or if this is getting at, because it's a religious question, or if this is getting at people being at a genuine disadvantage from birth. I'm going to assume it just means luck. Maybe I'm reading too much into it. It is important that my child's school instills religious values. I did say that a school's primary responsibility is to equip children for jobs because values should be taught at home, but they should also be taught at school. And so I think that it's important for schools to have religious values behind them, but also be equipping children for jobs. So I'm going to strongly agree that I believe religious values should be a part of the school system, but I think the primary aspect of school is to equip children and values should be taught at home. So just to clarify myself. Okay, last page. Finally, a look at sex. Ooh, great. Sex outside marriage is usually immoral. Of course, it's always immoral. Usually, this should be always. Okay, a same-sex couple in a stable, loving relationship should not be excluded from the possibility of child adoption. I'm going to strongly disagree, but I'm going to explain myself very carefully. So, I believe that a same-sex couple is founded on the principle of rebellion against God. I believe that that is not actually love. I think it's a warped definition of love. So when it says loving relationship, I don't believe that it's at all love. I believe it's lust completely. And so I don't think a child should be raised in an environment where the primary identity of the relationship is the sexual orientation. I believe that that damages the innocence of children, and I believe that that isn't love at all. I believe that that child is being raised in an environment which advocates more for lust than it does for love. However, there are cases where a child is going to either be in the foster care system, and there's a lot of problems in the foster care system. And if that child is rather be in the foster care system than a same-sex couple, that's where we can have that conversation. But the thing is, I don't believe that that child will be loved in that household. The only reason that I would say that maybe the child is better off in a same-sex couple family isn't because the child will be loved more, but will probably have a better chance at survival. But when we break it down to the child has a better chance of survival, that's pretty sad. So that's why I'm going to strongly disagree, but we can have the conversation about whether the child goes to foster care or a same-sex couple. We can have that conversation. Anyway, that's probably a very controversial one but yeah, that's what I believe. Pornography depicting consenting adults should be legal for the adult population. I strongly disagree. I don't believe you have a right to pornography at all. I know people say, oh, we have rights to pornography. I think that's ridiculous. And pornography depicting consenting adults, oftentimes it might be depicting consenting adults, but pornography has supported inadvertently sex trafficking. Many women in these videos and men, more women than men, vastly, are not actually consenting to the actions that are being portrayed in the video. And there is no way that you can tell because oftentimes they're being forced into this industry. And so that in itself is evil, even from a secular standpoint. But also pornography, Jesus makes it clear. Even if you look at a woman in lust, you commit adultery with her in your heart. So not only are you glorifying what those people are doing by filming themselves and putting it on the internet, but also you are engaging in sin yourself by watching it. So I hate pornography with a passion. What goes on in the private bedroom between consenting adults is no business of the state. Okay, I'm going to slightly disagree, and that might sound a little weird, but the reason I slightly disagree is because I think that the wider society should be concerned about what people are getting together and having sex, if they're doing it outside of marriage, if I mean, it says consenting adults. I won't get into pedophilia then, but if people are engaging in same-sex sex, or if people are having sex outside of marriage, I think that is a concern of the wider society, because I think that's an evil in society that we should be concerned about. And so when it says business of the state, I'm not just meaning government, I'm meaning society as a whole within that nation. So that's why I'm going to say I disagree with it. But I don't strongly disagree with it because I believe a couple should have privacy in their own home. No one can feel naturally homosexual. Okay, so as Christians, this is often debated. I believe that since I'm a straight male who is not attracted to men in any way, I believe that I can't just all of a sudden decide one day, hey, I'm going to be attracted to men. So I believe that people that are, in most cases, attracted to men are naturally attracted to men. But I do believe that society in general has promoted it to a point where it has influenced some men to become gay. I know two people. I know one person that is gay who, and I don't like to label people as gay because I believe our identity is in God, not in our sexual orientation. So I know one person that is same-sex attracted who has said that he wasn't born same-sex attracted, but learned it over time. And I know another person that is same-sex attracted that said that he's always felt that way. And so I think that it's possible, but I'm going to say that it's not something that is completely natural either. But as Christians, where we struggle is oftentimes we'll say, well, if God just makes people gay, does he just condemn some people to hell? Well, no, because that's just some part of you that you have to take up your cross and deny yourself, where you have to deny that sexual pleasure of engaging in those actions. That's hard, but that's what's required of us. We all have sins in our lives that we need to repent of, and we need to deny and take up our cross and follow Jesus. So I don't think that people becoming naturally homosexual is antithetical, but I do believe it has been perpetuated by society. These days, openness about sex has gone too far. I strongly agree. Just look at the new curriculum in a lot of states and provinces for sex education. We should not be teaching children about sex toys. I don't think that's something that should be taught at all in school. I think that the basics of sex should be taught, but also the basics of sex should be taught primarily at home, not in school. And if a parent does not want the school to be teaching their child about sex, they shouldn't have to put their child through sex education. So I believe it should be an option for parents to either put their child through it or not, but it should primarily be taught by parents. So, yes, of course, it's gone too far. So let's see where I stand. So it put me right here. Okay, so I would say that this is accurate. I said that if it puts me in this kind of box here, that's pretty accurate. We kind of measure it to here, put me here, but I don't think that these completely translate over. But yeah, I would agree with this, but I was expecting myself to be more in here. So is this test as accurate as a math equation? No, but I'd say it's more accurate than a horoscope. So don't lose sleep at night over this test, and don't rely on it to like go cast your vote. Actually look at politicians' policies and ask yourself if you agree or disagree with things. Look at the Bible as a Christian and say, is this politician, is what they're doing Christian? Don't just go and aimlessly vote because you took a test online and said, oh, I guess I'm this. So use it as a benchmark, but don't use it as a complete reference to your political ideology. But anyway, you should have an idea of where I stand on a lot of social and economic issues. So this has been Discerning Truth, signing off.